privilege of me being your host this morning. My name is Evan Lee. I am your host, obviously, and I'm also the current secretary for the Phi Theta Kappa Upsilon Phi chapter. I would first like to introduce our Vice President, Dr. Johnson, who's here with us this morning. He is Head of Academic Affairs and Student Services, correct? Thank you. All right, and I want to, again, thank you all for coming. This is part of our Honors and Action project that Phi Theta Kappa has every year. And I would like to introduce to you our guests, our panelists this morning. We have Ashton Foodrail, correct? Wonderful. Who's a Community Relations Liaison for Danville Police Department. We have Robert David, who is the Gang Violence Prevention Coordinator. We have Scott Booth, the Chief of Police for Danville City. Abena Bediako, who is a mental health clinician. Paul Farrar, who is the Director of Care, Case, and Scale Up Program here at UCC. And Barry Mayo, who is a Danville City Councilman and the recruiter for Case, Scale Up Program here at UCC. And we have Mark Mills, who is a criminal justice professor here at UCC. And before I go any further, if you are a student of Ms. Scott, please see her after the event for your extra credit. Got to get that extra credit in. All right, most of you know what juvenile delinquency is, so we won't go over that. But a lot of people don't know what a barrier crime is. A barrier crime is any criminal conviction that legally disqualifies the person who has been convicted to work in certain jobs. And with that, we'll go on with the question. Our first question goes to Robert Davis. Teen courts are being established at increasing rates all over the United States. Currently, there is little information available about how teen courts operate or how they affect youth offenders. Can you explain the concept of a teen court and how this will affect Danville financially?
Teen court, there are several different, hundreds of variations of teen court. Okay. Teen court, there are several different variations of teen court, but most of them, or the majority of them, are geared at dealing with crimes to be diverted or being taken away from the court system so that they don't have that issue of being excluded because of that particular crime, meaning going through the judiciary system, getting a conviction and things like that. One resource where you can go find out a lot about teen court, I just went to a training, is the Global Youth Justice Organization.org. I'm sorry, Global Youth Justice.org. And they have different variations. This is the entity that does the training and will come in and set up those teen courts. Now, again, like I said, there's certain different variations. I'm from North Carolina. The most typical one that most people may be familiar with is the one that's set up just like the court system. The difference is that the teenagers or the youth will be the jury. There will be the attorneys and the defendant, and it is supervised by adults, most times attorneys or judges, things like that. And so that normally there are restrictions based on general statutes of that state. What you can't do normally would be 30 hours of community service, writing a letter, whatever the case may be, but there are restrictions and there are certain crimes that are only allowable to go through there. And some states have one-time offenses, many. So just to give you a background so you understand what teen court really consists of, and it's truly about bringing the community in so the individuals can have an opportunity to be accountable for what has happened without dealing with all the residue of going through the court system and having to deal with that for the rest of life. For example, a simple fight in school in North Carolina before the age was raised to 18. If you were 16 years old and you became involved in a mutual combative fight, a simple affray, then you would go to court and you would be charged with a misdemeanor. And that would be on your record the rest of your life, and you wouldn't be able to go to the military and things like that. Imagine how that impacted the average kid who may have been an A honor roll student and got in a civil fight, and then they were also going to send to jail. So what teen court did is you go to teen court, there's a level of admission that you did do it. And in North Carolina, it goes to the probation department. So if you don't do recommendations of the teen court, then it will go to court. Now, saying all that to say, Danville has started teen court process is through an agency out of Alexandria called CIPHA, and that stands for Children, Youth, and Families Advocacy. And this is a restorative justice program, and what this does, they've already begun. I think they're about 6 weeks in, maybe 2 months. And so what this program looks like is similar to that. And because of the makeup of Danville and kind of the close knit, they're going to be 2 separate portions. One is the more tribal, meaning that communities will make decisions about individuals in the community. For example, 2 young men are playing out the street, one breaks the window of the neighbor says, hey, I'm not worried about it. I don't want to press charges, but they might still just have some accountability. So kind of long story short is that community would have already had a group of people who volunteered to come together and participate in this. And they would already set up their own rules based on the general statute, because Virginia just passed a law for something peer court similar to that maybe about 6 months ago. So prior to that, Virginia didn't have a teen court statute. So that was just passed. So the community would come together and say, okay, what could be done about this? As opposed to taking this kid downtown and arresting him or whatever, filing charges. It may be something as well, you clean up your community. That's one side of it. The other side of it is what I explained previously with individuals coming together. But with that, they have constructed a program where individuals involved with this would be taught about the judiciary system. So it would consist of volunteers, of adults and youth who come together, who learn what juries do, who learn what attorneys do, who learn about the law, learn about your rights and all those things, and you come together. And so when an individual does something, he goes through this process, then he would be not judged, but it's a restorative act because the harm was done. And so what can we do not only to restore that individual, but also to restore the youth who's doing something that is caused some harm. So in a nutshell, we're in process of doing this thing, and we need all you guys because it is a community, it is a city thing, it is a unification, it is about restorative justice, it's about engaging individuals and youth and young people being connected to the community. It's all about bridging that gap between one generation and another generation, use the wisdom of the older generation in order to empower the strength of the younger generation while still dealing with things like disproportionate incarceration of brown and black people, dealing with situations in community, provoking community involvement. So if you would like to get involved, please contact me because right now they're doing assessment surveys where they're talking to everyone in the city and finding out exactly what that is about and who wants to be involved in this as we move forward. So we can move forward into these processes and provide avenues for these young people who may commit those very crimes.
All right, thank you so much. Would anyone like to touch up on that or make a comment before we move on?
So I'll make a comment on that. So the key really is what Robert was saying, restorative justice, right? So if you look at research in Wisconsin, if you look at what folks are doing up north of Vermont, they have robust restorative justice models in place literally for decades. So if we want something like that to be here, which I think many of you, I know I want that here, your voice has to be heard, okay? Because what you'll find is many times communities will want to have it both ways. So many times they'll want to talk about restorative justice, maybe in a forum like this, but when it comes to problems, they just want somebody to come and arrest that problem away. Are you with me? They want to call the chief, they want to call Sergeant Ferguson, and we're just going to arrest that kid that's out in the street for breaking that window. We don't want to be involved in that. We just want the problem to go away. But for a community to really build something like teen court and to impact barrier crimes, it can't just be from the government. Does that make sense? You have to have your voices be heard. That's how something like that can emerge in a community. I'm really excited for the things that Robert's doing and our friends from Build Strong up north coming here and building that restorative justice model. But you have to be heard because Danville is, no offense, I'm not from here. Mr. Mayor, don't get mad at me. But Danville still is a byproduct of the old South, right? So there's still a whole lot of lock them up and throw away the key, right? So if you want to move beyond that, voices have to be heard so we can build a more effective model. If not, power systems many times will default to lock them up and build and throw away the key. All right, so that's just my 2 cents on that. I'm excited about the project. I think it's going to be good for our community.
Just one last thing, the name of the project is Build Strong, the Build Strong Initiative. And the model that they're using, actually, Danville was someone of the first one in Virginia to do this model. It's called Peter, and they created it promoting empathy through equitable resolution. The name of the agency again is Center for Youth and Family Advocacy.
All right, thank you so much. You folks brought up some really good points, and we'll get back to that later. The next question I have is for Professor Neal. You have been in, you're a federal, oh Lord help me, I forgot the, I forget words all the time.
That's okay. I was a federal probation officer.
Thank you, that's what I was.
20 years.
So what have you talked about the residue of being drugged through the court system or dragged through the court system. So Professor Mills, what have you seen come from youth being introduced into the system at earlier ages?
So the research has shown for many years that the younger a child is introduced into the juvenile system, the longer they stay in the system. And the likelihood that there's going to be school failure, disengagement from school, increased probability of being in the adult system as they age out of the juvenile system. And the outcomes are not good. So part of this goes back to labeling here, that if you label someone a juvenile delinquent or a criminal early in their life, you really don't get out from under that for most of your life. When we talk about barrier crime, there's also barrier labels attached to people. You know, a kid gets involved in a smaller community and it's, I want the problem to go away. We don't want to take time to have restorative justice. We want the problem fixed immediately. And what happens is that kid is labeled, thrown into the system, and long-term outcomes for that child who then becomes an adult are not good at all. I mean, it really comes back to how do we want to treat people. I was reading something yesterday in preparation for this, talking about public safety. It really is a public safety issue. If we treat people better in the community with teen courts or other restorative justice measures, then we really end up having a better community, a safer community. And if you don't label people, if people, grow up, they have their problems. I'm not talking about serious crimes. I'm talking about minor entanglements that a lot of people have. A lot of us may have had not been caught, frankly. Things are not better. We have more job opportunities, more educational opportunities, more opportunities to go in the military. And when that is taken away because of a label attached to you, life becomes much harder. And also sometimes it's hard for those folks to stay on the straight and narrow because there are opportunities that are blocked for legitimate access to the things that we all want to achieve. So I see it as public safety, I see it as community, and it really does take all of us. I mean, it is so great to have the law enforcement folks saying, let's get after teen court, let's do something different. Because a lot of times it doesn't happen there. But I see that as a broader, positive, forward movement that we really all need to be involved. I mean, because it's just not the law enforcement community, it's everybody's community.
Anyone would like to touch up on that, expand, comment? No? Okay, well, we'll move on then. Robert, you talked about the inequalities in the system concerning, I think you quoted brown people. So 1 out of every 3, this is actually for 3 of you, whether it be Scott or Robert or Ashton. 1 out of every 3 Black boys born today can expect to be sentenced to prison compared to 1 out of 6 Latino boys and 1 out of 17 white boys. Research has indicated that unconscious racial bias often impacts human behavior. What can law enforcement do in terms of training, educating, and preventing to combat unsuspicious racial bias so that it does not impact how police enforce law?
So, the default for that really is, you've heard this term implicit bias training over the years, certainly over the last decade. certainly over the last 2 years. And implicit bias training is very important for all officers, very important for folks in the criminal justice community, but it is not, for want of better words, the magic bullet. Does that make sense? So implicit bias training, departments have rushed out and they've said after this questionable police shooting or after this uproar in the community, we're going to make sure that we train everybody on implicit bias. We all have biases. I have biases, Rob, Ashton. We all have biases, right? We label people many times off of previous experiences we personally had, off of something our mother, father, sister, or whatever has told us. So we have a bias. So implicit bias is, from my understanding and having attended the training, is how you cope with those biases, right? Which is important. But from a law enforcement standpoint, it's beyond that implicit bias training. It's also how you deploy resources, all right, how you address criminal offenders or potential violent offenders in communities. It's moving away from over-policing of communities. Have you heard that concept, over-policing communities? So let's talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to equate it to real-world examples here in our community, right? So when you look at crime in a community, theoretically, most crime in a community is driven by a very small, and I'm talking violent crime, so let me move back. Most violent crime in a community is caused by a very small number of offenders coming from a very small number of places. Does that make sense? So sometimes it's even street segments, and sometimes it's either 4 or 5 people that are driving a lot of your crime. So the old way of looking at policing, and the way many police departments still do it today, there's a shooting, and let's say a neighborhood called the Westmoreland neighborhood, and all of a sudden, we're just going to send a bunch of police officers over there, and we're going to do a bunch of police work in that neighborhood. All right, and we're going to do traffic stops over there, stop people walking around in that community, and probably at the end of the day, guess what? We will make some arrests, and maybe you'll get lucky or what have you. And within that net of entanglement that you've thrown in that black or brown community, you have possibly got one of your violent offenders that has been driving some of your crime. Are you with me? All right. A smarter way to do that is taking some of the bias out, is by being much more strategic in these communities when you're solving problems. All right, we all know the person who's out there doing the shooting. We know people that are doing robberies. And guess what? Those are the folks we need to focus on. Whether we use social media, whether we're using robust investigative methods, however we're doing it, we need to hone in on those folks with the scalpel, not a sledgehammer. And until we learn, until police departments get better at doing that, we're still going to have that level of bias that happens. I think that's one thing that we suffered from for years here. I would like to think we've got better. When you look at these problem places, I'll even equate the incident from last night that I spoke about when I walked in the door. A gentleman lost his life, but he was connected to a residence that 3 years ago, another gentleman lost his life in that same area. 2 years ago, somebody else was shot in that area, connected to this very small street segment of criminal activity that was occurring. All right, in this case, probably illegal gambling. So if you hyper focus on that and you're quick enough, usually you can, knock on wood, can stop crime from occurring. Not always perfect, just like what last night showed us. But that's how you do it. What you don't do, just send a bunch of cops over there flooding the neighborhood and hoping you're going to get lucky. That's how you take some of the bias out of there, that and implicit bias training.
So just to talk a little bit about what Danville Police Department is doing more specifically when it comes to additional trainings and implicit bias. So a lot of times within police departments everywhere, a lot of the officers receive training through online material, which, as you know, can be very boring. And a lot of times you can just click through the training and not pay much attention. So we wanted to make sure we were intentional in prioritizing giving our officers in-person training, which you don't see a lot of at police departments due to funding. So we have made that a priority at the Danville Police Department. So last year, we actually had a 3-day training for our officers on implicit bias, cultural awareness, and how to deal with stress and high stress situations. And this year coming up in early December, we have our next training on social change and leadership, because a lot of you know that our environment's always changing, our communities are always changing, and the need for the people that officers serve is always changing. So we have made it intentional and a priority to make sure that our officers are getting that in-person training, which can be a lot more engaging and beneficial for the officers.
And Ashley, let me add the Eclipse program in there. And this is something else we're doing, which really speaks to bias, but it speaks to community training. So last summer, with the murder of George Floyd, I knew we needed more community-based training here. And we developed something called the Eclipse Program, which is the Community Leadership Emergent Program. And we worked with a community asset-based manager to develop a 4-week training. So currently, police officers go to the police academy for 20 weeks, then they go to field training for 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and then they come out in the community. They come out in your community, right? Many of these officers have never walked in this community before. There are some officers that aren't from here. There are some officers that don't understand Black and brown communities, some officers that don't understand the LGBTQ community, that don't understand our Hispanic community. So I knew we needed some type of community-based training, not developed by me, not me telling them how to act or Ashton telling them, but the community telling them. So this asset-based manager got 47 community leaders together from those communities I spoke of and many others. And for 4 weeks, these new officers have to go through that training to hear about the community, the wants, the needs, impact of over-policing, impact of one disrespectful comment by an officer can have on that person's family. So for 4 weeks, they go through that. And we're in our 3rd iteration of that, and it's been very well received by officers and the community. Not perfect, but in my world, when you're trying to make policing better, you have to have the community as a piece of that. Sorry.
All right, thank you all. My next question is for Abba. So, Professor Neal talked about labels and their effect. So an issue often taken less seriously is adequate mental health support. In your practice, have you seen an increase or decrease in at-risk youth seeking out mental health resources?
Good morning. I have seen not even it's been stagnant. And I would say it's been stagnant because of the stigma attached to mental health that's still there. We see more and more in social media, on TV, with actresses, actors now speaking out, talking about mental health. However, still in our communities, there's a stigma. So there hasn't been an increase or decrease. I would say that the families, there's been an increase, wanting their children, wanting their child to get mental health, especially over the last 2 years because of COVID. And what that has dealt, the suicide rate increase, the abuse and trauma increase. So there's been an increase to get that child the support and help. I would also add that because there's been an increase on that level, there's been more waste in the community because of the lack of funding, because of the lack of clinicians, therapists that's able to take one. So for so many cases at a time. There hasn't been an increase as far as that child stepping up, but as far as the family and the mother particularly, because a lot of times in our families, they're still a single family that mother has stepped up to try to get that child assistance.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to add to that? On to our next question. So my next question is for Councilman Barry Mayo. What was your goal for the TARE, TAPE, and Scale Up program?
Thank you. When Paul for the new director, and being a part of the Scale Up program, our goal is to help all who come in to better their lives as far as getting a second opportunity. When I'm hearing all our speakers, I'm hearing about this second opportunity in our whole itinerary dealing with barrier crimes. Skill Up program deals with those individuals who have had barrier crimes, who have need a second chance. This program is a partnership with our social services. It gives those parents, the family, the opportunity to turn their life around. What I mean by the parent, it gives that parent the opportunity to know that they can come and get quality education, get a career path that will help the family and build the family. So this is our targeted individuals in our program are the ones who have fallen to the wayside and need a second chance. And we know that when they get that conviction or they fell off because of drugs, because of lack of education, and just a lack of love, this program does that. And all it takes is the fact that you have to have a child or children 19 years and under. That's what our program leans towards, and it's written for is those individuals who need not only a hand up, but instead of a hand out.
My next question is actually for Paul for Ross. Since implementing these, well, let me correct this first. So from our definition of various crimes, we know that they affect employment. And even President Neal touched upon that, after that. So since implementing these programs, have you seen an increase in recruitment of people into jobs? And how have they impacted the community?
Yes, we have. Our program has been successful in helping people get their education and move into the workforce. That is one of the matrices that we have to report on to DSS. And each year we do show a growth in jobs that our students get from coming through the TARE Cape and Scale Up program. So we do show success there. And we also show success in their income. They come with us sometimes for their income, and then they get a raise as they get their education and they get more income. I know one of the quarterly reports I just turned in, we showed one, we had 1,000% increase in the income that came in for the, with the reporting we did. And that's because some of our students got some really good jobs. And that's thanks in part to the labor shortage now. If somebody's willing to work, then if they get the training and show that determination, somebody's going to hire them and they're going to pay them well because supply and demand, basically. Supply and demand works for anything, jobs or anything like that. If somebody wants to work, and somebody's going to pay them. As far as the TARE Cape and Scale Up program, think about it. Think about when you're out in public and you meet somebody for the first time. If I go out and talk to somebody, one of the first questions you ask is, hey, what do you do? Because that is a source of pride. Work is a source of pride for us a lot of times. So a lot of times when you go out and meet somebody, you ask them, what do you do? And that's what our program is helping you do, helping you get a job that you can be proud of, that you can tell somebody, I did this and I support my family with it. And that's, we've got several success stories. I can just think of one here recently. A fellow just got out of jail and it's on probation. And we brought him into, he had already been part of Skill Up, and then he found by the wayside, but he came back because he has a special relationship with Councilman Mayo here. And he's like, I want to get my life turned around. So we put him in the ESL ProPAC training. We've got this training at DCC where they go through 2 weeks of training and then have a job at ESL ProPAC. He was the first person to show up every day for training. He did everything we asked him to do to TARE Cape and Scale Up. He was always coming. After 2 weeks, he's over there working. Now he's working overtime. And last time when we got his first pay, one of his paychecks, he made $1,400 in 2 weeks. And he said, this is the most money I've ever had in my pocket. And one day we also helped him get a place to stay. And we paid his first month's rent until he got his first paycheck. He's paid his rent in January now. So this little guy's doing great. I told him, I said, I'm so proud of you. You can see when you tell somebody how they're proud of them. They usually don't hear that much. They just light up. And it was a good thing and heartwarming to see. So that's basically, our program in a nutshell. That's what we did to help. And we always tell them we got in the community. money's no object when you come to DCC here. You know, we got funds that can help you with this program. We can help you. You need to come and concentrate on your studies. We can help you around any barrier, because it's not a barrier, it's a roadblock. And we can go around that roadblock.
And piggyback on what Paul said. And when you look at the partnerships that we have here with the police department, social services, with every community, it gives that is the family bridge that a lot of our citizens need, because used to be in the reentry before I came to DCC, and our reentry for full community action, which I dealt with the city and county, or anyone coming out of jail, local jail, prison. My job was to help them become productive citizens. The stabilization of employment, career paths, as well as all the needs that the individuals were needing coming out. So when I came into the scale program, it just rolled off me because of the fact of what I've been doing prior. And now with being on city council, and one of the goals that we had is criminal justice reform. Chief Booth, his staff are doing a tremendous job in turning around our city as far as the crime rate. And I see that anytime you see what's happening out there, as well as we saw last night, they're on top of it. And what I see is they use or they've already fixed the issue and moved on.
Thank you. Does anyone want to make any final comments on that? All right, we'll move on. So my next question is for Professor Neal. There is no national standard for the age of the youth being entered into the system. What are some of the consequences you have seen because of this? Can you picture an ideal situation to combat this issue? And what does the research point to as an effective plan for youth crime prevention?
You know, if I had an answer for that, I'd probably sit there. So there is no national system. There's no national minimum maximum age. Every state does what they want to do. North Carolina has a minimum age of 6 to be introduced to the juvenile justice system, and 15 is the maximum age. So if you are beyond age 15 in North Carolina, you're automatically going to be treated in adult court, which is kind of a shot in the face. In Virginia, we have no minimum age, and the maximum age is anything under age 18, which is fairly common across the country, although again, every state does it quite differently. By not having a national system, you know, it's hard to say that everyone is treated fairly across the country. So in Virginia, for instance, while you can stay in juvenile court, at age 14, you can be transferred to adult court, depending on the seriousness of the offense, whether the prosecutor files a motion, a hearing is held, and a decision is made. That goes on across the country, but it's really quite different. So justice is not quite, you know, say equally applied across the country, because there just isn't any national standards. I don't think there will be. There doesn't seem to be a lot of impetus or pressure to do that. A lot of times we forget about juvenile court, quite frankly, across the country. If you talk to attorneys and judges, they'll say the least favorite thing they ever did was handle a juvenile case. So there's just nobody seems to want to do that. I just think that, you know, nationally, the verbiage we use is that juvenile court is to rehabilitate juveniles. And I think we have to look at that, because when you put somebody in the system, label them, perhaps send them away to a program for a lengthy period of time, I'm not sure that they feel, the child feels like they've been rehabilitated. I think that some instances may feel like they've been, the system came down hard on them and punished them. So, I mean, when you think about it, and again, when I was a juvenile officer, I had to do things that, for community safety, for the safety of the family the juvenile may have been in, but they needed to get assistance. And a lot of times that assistance was a long ways away from home. It's just, you know, there's no easy answers when it comes to juveniles. I can say that the better that we treat juveniles who are involved in minor offenses, perhaps the better our community is in the long term.
Does anyone want to comment on that? All right, go ahead.
To add what the professor was saying, I totally agree. I think One is labels. In my profession, I've been doing writing therapy for about 20 years. And I've seen more Black and brown children, particularly boys, labeled with opposition defiant, conduct disorder, those type of labels that in elementary school, it creates and it helps perpetuate the what's it called? The pipeline. And it's real. It's real. There have been cases and situations that I've been involved in where I have a Black boy that did a similar action, got into a fight or something like that. And a therapist will strive to label them with oppositional defiant, but their peer, a white boy the same age, may be labeled with adjustment disorder or something like that. And those labels stick and they carry. And it's also one of the reasons why children don't seek therapy. Nobody wants to be labeled as the bad child, as the one who is a delinquent. Those terms don't feel good. So I think at the core, changing the language that we use and that we say to young people, offering love, I think Barry had mentioned that word before, coming at it from a perspective of healing, knowing that in order to reach that child, you have to reach the family. So making sure that a family has secure housing, making sure that they have food, that is not, these food deserts going around in the country, that there, isn't any housing insecurity, that education is on par for every child. So making sure that that is at the core nationwide will bring forth a lot of positive changes.
Anyone else? Okay.
You said something that kind of resonated, and that's healing. Again, and I'll periodically for the Build Strong initiative throughout the whole path, because it's very important, it's necessary, and then it will benefit beyond any of you guys' imagination, because something like that has never been done in a place where there has been so much bias and separation. And you're talking about bringing a city together in order to receive healing, because when someone does something, regardless of how they may act as a teenager or as though they don't care, they're still human and they still have emotions. And there is a sense of the population we're talking about, the first time offenders are getting in a fight. There's a level of embarrassment, not only for themselves, but for his family. There's a level of feeling that I've messed up everything I've done. So the beginning part of healing is being able to come into something with Build Strong, a peer court or a team court, and addressing those things and talking to both parties, understanding that the community is behind you and the community is here to, not even the community, the city is here to support you in your failures as well as in your successes. And being able to understand that this incident does not define the rest of my life, whereas in the judiciary system, a simple fight can define the rest of your life. So healing is very important. At the lowest level is why Team Court, the Build Strong initiative, is so important to implement in the city.
Anyone else? So to go along with actually the initial question, my question is for Dr. and his colleagues. How does the Danville Police Department measure the effectiveness of a correction system?
So really, when it looks at the police department, it always look, to me, an effective correction system is one that nobody's incarcerated. All right, but we also have no crime. Does that make sense? So in a perfect world, all right, I would like to see low levels of crime and no incarceration. But when you see, you're looking at crime in Danville, in December of 2020, we hit a 35-year low in reported crime. And at that same time, we had also our lowest levels of local incarceration in both the adult and the juvenile system. So let that sink in for a minute. So you can have low rates of crime if you are strategically focused on the right people in the right places. Does that make sense? When I talked about scalpel, when you look at crime or reducing crime, in no way in our community do we want folks running around that are burglarizing homes, robbing people or shooting people, right? We have an obligation, I look at, as a police chief and members of my staff, we have an obligation to keep people safe. But I would posit that we can still keep people safe if we are focusing on the serious violent offenders versus going out and over-policing and arresting people just on low-level drug charges, just on cases, just on minor offenses, which really have created a lot of the ills that we talk about when you look at the so-called war on drugs in the 80s and 90s, disparate sentencing. All that was in response to levels of violence, right? So all that was looking at what crack cocaine was causing, was wreaking havoc in many of our communities. So the legislature decided that they were going to over-criminalize certain offenses. All right, but we moved beyond that, and now we have to go back to strategically looking at those serious and violent criminal offenders, holding them accountable, but coming up with restorative models, like a team board, right? That this requires community buy-in. All right, when I say community buy-in, it's not just everybody sitting in here, but it's other folks out there, business folks, it's everybody that's involved in the community. We have to get away from folks saying, well, only bad things happen on that side of town. I like telling stories to illustrate things. When I first got here in 2018, people would come up to me and say, you know, Danville's a pretty good city. Crime doesn't happen in my neighborhood. It happens on the other side of town. Anybody ever heard that before? This is one community, this is one city. And for a city to really change, people have to recognize that one community is really all communities. All right, I don't care if you only have shootings in a certain area. Guess what? I don't care where you live. That's still a reflection of your community. So that's how you have to message that. And that's how you have to get people to buy in to support things like Team 40. Recently, I had somebody come up to me. There's another quick illustration, and said that if you remember a couple months ago, there were a number of fights at our high school. This gentleman, I consider him I don't want to say community leader, but a community voice. And he said if he had his way, then what he would do is he would put everybody that had involved in those fights, he would put them in the detention center. And that's where they would receive their education. Once again, let that sink in. So as long as we have folks that look at that as the remedy to our social ills, we'll continue to have some challenges, right? So we, as certainly as leaders in the community, whether you're the chief of police or you're the youth violence coordinator, your Sergeant Ferguson, or esteemed colleagues to my right, we have to make sure we are messaging what the community needs. So a correction system to me looks at low levels of incarceration, more opportunity, but also those low levels of crime, right? We have an obligation to keep people safe. So.
Anyone want to comment on that? My next question is going to be for Abhinav Vidyakar. So you were talking about mental health and what labels can do at a young age. But what does the research say about the effects of a burial crime later on in that person's age have on their mental state?
It says that possibly I'm worthless, that I'm not a man, that I cannot provide for my family, that I'm a mother. How am I going to take care of my children because I cannot afford to live in affordable living home, and that plays on a person. That causes stress, anxiety, which we know leads to major depressive disorder, which may lead to suicide, which leads to a whole lot of other doors that we don't always want to open. So the research is showing that if a person goes down a path and does not receive the resources and the help and the education and the tools that they need to come back to a more healthy, positive path, then those barrier crimes will lead generational cycles of trauma. And at the core, it's trauma that we're looking at. It's trauma that we're dealing with that's wrapped up in a whole bunch of other labels that we like to put on it. because we don't want to deal with and face the trauma that we as a people, as a society has caused. So those barrier crimes, whether they be a fight or someone stealing, this recently happened in Durham, I practiced in Durham, a soda out the store. Now they have to deal with a whole bunch of other stuff because they were thirsty and the person was unsheltered, which was homeless. So now they have to go to court, they're locked up because they can afford a $2 soda. So it's incidents like that. And it leaves a person, if someone doesn't have self-worth, self-esteem, they cannot positively take care of themselves or their families. Also, if they cannot live in a situation, I see this in Danville, where I was born and raised, the housing situation is crazy. There's no other way to put it, it's crazy. So if I do have a crime attached to me and I can only work at a certain job, I can only get a certain type of housing. But that housing, we already know, isn't going to be safe for my children. I'm not going to be safe living there. It's a cycle that we are perpetuating. Instead of dealing with the real issue of the trauma of generational and not providing for a person's basic needs.
Does anyone want to touch up on that comment? All right, well, this actually isn't an official question, but I think the people here and the people on Zoom need to hear it. You talked about depression and low self-esteem. Where can people here get resources to help with that?
And they got to turn the mic on. Thank you. So there are a lot of places for people to get mental health now, especially because of COVID. That is a hot topic, and really it stays a hot topic because we all need to heal. We can go online. I know here social services, PAVs, different places like that, and Danville, Black Girls for Therapy, Black Men for Therapy. These are different websites that you can go on. ThriveWorks is another agency that is within the country. But there are a lot, suicide networks, if somebody is feeling very depressed and have active or passive suicide thoughts. Talk to me afterwards. We can definitely get you some assistance for the folks in here or on Zoom. But don't be ashamed to seek help, because at the core was my belief, professionally and personally, is that everyone wants to be happy and healed. That's our core right, is to be happy and healed. And don't be embarrassed because you're feeling depressed, because you cannot afford healthy foods to feed your family. And we know that healthy foods provide the vitamins and minerals that our body and our brain needs to go to school and learn and to be productive and to do the things that we need to do. But if we only have money that we're going to purchase empty calories and unhealthy foods, it's all part of an unhealthy cycle. I know I cleared off a little bit because it's not so much. But there are a wealth of resources out there for people who are looking for somebody to talk to, and I can share it with you all, and you can post it online on your site. So yeah.
Thank you. We are running low on time. Beyonce, are there any questions on Zoom? All right, okay. Well, I do have one more that I want to get to, and it's for Robert Tate. You started a program called Project Imagine, is that correct?
Correct.
And if I'm not mistaken, you actually won an award for that, for the program did, right?
Correct.
All right, can you tell us what your goal was when you started Project Imagine?
To keep young men from dying in the streets. Plain and simple. Everything else was just the kind of what was necessary in order to achieve that goal, is decrease the amount of young people that were dying when I came into the city in 2018. There was some homicides, large number, and I was hired for that purpose. And so one of the things I know, you guys are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy needs, if you've ever spent 2 minutes in the college classroom. And so one of the things that we make a mistake is that we think that is linear, and it's not. It's symmetrical, meaning that once they join the game, they already have self-actualization. There's no growth. So what we had to do, Project Imagine does, is that we look at those individuals and we look at the needs, every individual need on Maslow's hierarchy needs, and we begin to find individuals. So Project Imagine is a gang prevention and gang violence prevention collaborative model. It's not a program we do it ourselves. We go into the community and find those individuals that do that work the best. And so we're looking at getting employment, who does it better than workforce? If we're looking for therapy, who does it better than therapist? It's not something that we try to create. And so by doing that, we begin to address some of the needs, but it all stands on, in this generation and in this city, it all stands on relationship. I don't care what you have in your hand, because it doesn't matter if I don't know what you have in your heart. And that's how this generation operates. And so the key to everything was coming to the city and talking to community members and these young men as many as I could. I don't profess to be that in the beginning to go on the low level, by no means, but the ones I could get to, and letting them know, look, this is genuine and you have a voice. That whatever you say down here in the street can make it up to City Hall. Maybe not in your voice, but in my voice, but in your intent. And that was a key to this. Now, the last 6 months, we were able to hire 2 more outreach workers, and it's been amazing, because now we're really talking to, you know, there's progress when you have individuals in the game referring other individuals. That's what it's, and that's where we are right now. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah, so, and as you can tell, as this collaboration working with law enforcement and the partnership that we have with them, by no means they respect what we do, and we respect what they do, and together we have this again, because part of Maslow's needs is safety. And we can all attest that the city's safe. And we just tap into that, because we're not law enforcement, we just provide that relationship to everything these young people need, and that's really been the success of the program.
All right, well, our time is coming to an end. Does anyone have any final quick comments before we end? All right, well, I would like to say thank you all for coming this morning. I know it was an awkward time during the week, but thank you. I would like to make a special few thank yous to Dr. Johnson. Did I see Dean Colbert walking in? There he is, yeah. I want to thank you too for ensuring that we get all of the help we need. I want to thank Faith O'Neal. There she is from PR getting us out. Thank you so much. Kevin Gatewood back there for student activities. Thank you for all the help you did. I want to thank our panelists for coming, entertaining discussion. It's wonderful to see the college and the community collaborate together and bring awareness to this. And I want to thank my colleagues, our Vice President, Neal Gregory, who's been holding the camera. We're filling over this entire event. I want to thank our President, Leilani Nichols. And I want to thank our advisors, Ms. Sherry Gott, Mrs. Mary Mosley, and Special JPM. Y'all have a fabulous day and even better weekend. Thank you.